Valentina Pena again, Senior Data Scientist here at Dataiku. And for the next short-ish, 25 minutes, we'll be talking about Gen AI, kind of where we've been over the past couple years and where we're going. We want to acknowledge that it is the big hot topic in boardrooms and CEOs' mouths across the world. And how does that play out with our customers? Where do we see it going? To join me today, I have a wonderful panel. I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves. You want to start, Aaron?
Thanks. Yeah, Aaron McClendon, head of AI at Aimpoint Digital. Been working with Dataiku for a while, and a lot of Gen AI and AI technology in my background. So, looking forward to the chat today.
Awesome. I'm Kirsten Hogenacker. I'm a senior solutions engineer at Dataiku. I've been at Dataiku for almost 3 years. Had the opportunity to use the platform prior to joining the team at Dataiku, and definitely have had so many conversations over the past year around Gen AI and LLMs.
Hi everyone, Austin Cook. I lead our solutions engineering team for the East here at Dataiku. I've been here just over 3 years with Dataiku, been in the analytics data science space, both on consulting and other software vendors for just over 10 years. Appreciated to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start us off with a little bit of a retrospective. I feel like not Dataiku, but Gen AI broadly, went from being a bit of a wild west into really creating some fascinating things relatively quickly. So starting with you, Aaron, what are some use cases that you've seen built out that have generated some really amazing value pretty quickly and have been those good wins to kind of prove out the value in enterprise and in the space more generally?
Yeah, I think when Gen AI first kind of came on the scene, there's the obvious kind of RAG use case is what everybody kind of starts with. And it makes sense. There's so much unstructured text data in the business environment. And so, with some of the new tools like Dataiku's rolled out, Dataiku Answers and some of those things, it's easy to build those kind of solutions and get something up and running. And I remember kind of back then when it was first coming on the scene, I was asking myself, like, it's going to be more than RAG, right? Like what's going to be the next thing? And we're starting to see that iteration unfold now, where we're seeing more complex builds, agentized frameworks. We're seeing a lot of multimodal models being used. So sort of like bridging the gap between the initial layer, which is someone consuming information from the RAG, and then the more advanced layer is sort of like promulgating that information out into the decision-making organization. So it's been interesting to see the evolution of it.
Yeah, awesome. And then Austin, what have you seen in terms of kind of how Dataiku been used most recently? I know that RAG, again, is one of the really big features that we came out with that people keep coming back to and getting a lot of value out of. Any specific use cases that you can think of where that's been helpful?
Yeah, so I think, again, that was sort of the easy, low-hanging fruit it's almost like an adaptive search or a productivity tool. And so a lot of folks started there, and answers came out, and it made it really easy to get started real quickly. And I think it actually, in some instances, it was just helpful, and we all love helpful things. But I think at other instances, it caught people off guard, actually, what the return on some of those investments. So, certainly things like an HR chatbot, for example, on paper, you say, oh, that's great, my employees are happy and everything's good. But then you dig in and you start to understand where people are actually answering these queries, and it's taking them away from their jobs. And there's people that are, lined up and spending a lot of time answering these queries, and there's implications when you're not actually getting access or taking advantage of some of the HR policies that are there. So when you start to see those things unfold, it's really exciting to see, and again, sort of fun to discover with your customers.
Awesome. And then you started us a little bit on the conversation of what we're seeing now, a lot of agentic workflows. Kirsten, you're kind of on the front lines of seeing what our customers ask about. What are you starting to see that people are moving on from?
Yeah, so I just had the opportunity to have an on-site with one of my customers in Minnesota. They're a big agriculture company. They're in the Fortune 500. You would never recognize their name, but they do some great things when it comes to providing grains and other commodities to all of us here. And they started out with the HR chatbot, right? They were like, we're going to start with something easy. It's going to be internal, not external facing. And some of the use cases that they've been building now, so it's basically like a readout of use cases. And it's, pulling in the traditional AI ML to kind of start off some of the more quantitative predictions and then layering that on with different prompts. So from like a marketing standpoint, can we start, classifying and having the segmentation portion of our customers? And then, to Ash's point earlier, if you were there for our conversation, how do you actually start creating that customized content to then campaign out and make sure that you're delivering the best bang for your buck when it comes to marketing, as an example?
Yeah, and do you want to jump right in, Aaron? Are you kind of seeing the same? Is there anything else that you would add there?
Yeah, from a use case standpoint, I think one of the ones that's been emerging most rapidly I've seen in the last year are augmenting sort of like the ETL process in a way. A lot of companies deal with this, and we've seen it everything from logistics to law firms. And the issue is you have large volumes of contracts coming in and specific pieces of information that you need from them. And so, normally it requires someone to kind of read through the document, extract that, and then place it into a structured database. Or you can, take the OCR approach where you're sort of pre-processing, but it's spotty and doesn't always work. And so when you can layer in that Gen AI kind of instrument to extract that specific piece of information and then use agentic kind of frameworks to push that into a structured database, that's one we've seen a lot of. And I think, the point around quantitative analysis is interesting as well, because the text to SQL and those sorts of applications have become more commonplace. And I think some of the more interesting applications we've seen have been direct customer-facing applications. So for example, we worked with a Dataiku customer. We just wrapped this up a few months ago, where now on their homepage website, when you go to it, there's a pop-up and says, welcome to our company. What questions can we answer? And you can ask questions like, what products do you offer? And that's all being served by Dataiku on the back end. And we've done similar things for travel companies, building itineraries for people using agentic frameworks with sort of like a multi-layer RAG architecture on the bottom. So yeah, some of those more like taking it from the RAG and layering additional things on top of that. Another example I've seen actually several times in the last few months is generating marketing collateral using multimodal models. And that's actually an interesting integration between causal traditional machine learning models, where we're analyzing historic customer behavior to extract customer segments that respond to certain types of marketing more quickly, and then generating that content based on the machine learning insights. So sort of integrating the traditional ML approach with the Gen AI approach.
And I think you call out something really interesting about how this has all been building on top of that RAG framework. And I think a question is, what do you think important learnings in that first phase, where it was kind of just RAG or the most basic functionality, were kind of what were those unlocks that customers, users learned that then said, okay, this is something we can build upon, and kind of this is our path to increased complexity?
Yeah, the RAG, I think it is no different. One thing we see people fall into this pitfall of when they're building these sorts of solutions is it's still a statistical model. And people tend to forget that when they're interacting with them because it's conversational. But treating it in a statistical manner, using the best practices that machine learning practitioners have built up for years, like hyperparameter tuning model configurations, and making sure you have a valid test set, and thinking through how you're going to monitor in production performance of these applications. Because it's easy to build something, but it's more challenging to build something that's good. And so we see a lot of people kind of fall into that trap. And I think from a learning standpoint, that's the biggest learning, is it's still a statistical model. You still have to apply those best practices.
Yeah, and I want to open that up to Kirsten and Austin as well. Anything that you think were kind of big learnings in the past year that have impacted what kind of use cases people are reaching for now, or have kind of reframed how they think about things?
Yeah, it's funny, Aaron. It's more of the usual. So the same problems continue to rise. It's Gen AI is hot and new, but it's I was here actually just 2 weeks ago in Atlanta at GenAI Week and gave a presentation about how data quality is still the biggest barrier for entry for folks moving into GenAI. And we had some learnings, I'll say, is of course at Dataiku we drink our own champagne, and so we started using GenAI internally in some of our use cases and went down the path of, hey, we got a lot of RFPs we'd like to automate and create some efficiencies in how we respond to those. And you think naturally, oh, we've got lots of old RFPs and we've all responded to them, Kirsten, myself, and
I've used
others.
the tool. Yeah. I've used the tool.
And so the initial thought is, hey, let's just take those old responses, throw them in a RAG and use them. And then you forget that, hey, when we responded to an RFP a long time ago, we didn't have GenAI functionality. And so if that question came in, that wouldn't be right. And so just, again, data quality, but also framing the right problem and how you tee up to solve it. Thinking about really what is your true golden source of data? Do you have that? Do you have enough? And all that other aspects are really becoming just more and more of the same.
I'll just add one thing. Awesome. I could think through several customers. When we came in to evaluate RAG solutions they had built, they were facing challenges, and they're saying, it's not getting these sorts of questions correct, or it's missing these things. And when you dig in, it's almost always a data issue in some sense. They're missing the data, it's not being pre-processed correctly. I agree that data is king for sure.
I think I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. So one of the hats that I wear at Dataiku is working on our govern platform and making sure that everybody's enabled on this front. And just like that same sort of hype cycle I think we've seen with traditional AI/ML, you've got this life cycle, and we're getting to the point where we actually need to have some pretty strong governance around the LLMs that we're putting out there into the world for external-facing use cases. In particular, internal too. There's definitely some problematic things that can happen, but the models are the same, but they're also very different. And so when you think about the qualification process, how are you making sure that the use cases that you're starting to iterate on are something that's actually useful? Are there risks associated? How do you start tracking the audits that are going to be coming your way and making sure that you've got everything that you need? And so maybe that's a little forward thinking, but I definitely am starting to see that come up as kind of okay, so we've got these cool products, but now what do we do with them? How are we continually monitoring them? How are we making sure that we've got the most up-to-date version? And so when we think about the LLM ops, that is also layered into that governance. I'm definitely seeing that starting to come up now that we've got use cases in prod.
I think that's a really interesting topic. I think it's kind of the idea of the next steps are not only just more of the GenAI applications, but also kind of the meta structure all around them. Do you have any examples of things that you've seen done really well? Or again, going back to the idea of impact, that, stories where people built something around this and said, this is what we've needed for a while?
I think when Dataiku released the tagging recipe for text-based data, this was something that was huge. So all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier for the data quality. I'm thinking about the RFP project, and I'm I don't know that we've actually built that into the project where we've been tagging our answers to kind of say, yep, this looks right. We're talking about this particular version, right? So being able to highlight certain portions of that text as ground truth to then feed back in to our vector store, I think is going to be important. I don't know if that's kind of what you're getting at, but I think the tooling that Dataiku has makes that governance a little easier, but you still need to have humans in the loop to be able to monitor. And so I think about the LLM evaluation tool, being able to have LLMs evaluate other LLMs, cool stuff, but then having, again, that documentation that you're going to need. I think this, again, is something that might come up later, but regulations are just going to keep on coming. So I think the more we can do to prepare for that now, the better. And I think, selfishly, Dataiku is a really great tool for that.
Yeah, I think you tapped into something really important, that is the idea of kind of this whole structure around it and the human in the loop. And what role is continual upskilling going to keep playing, right? I think that we've gotten to a point where AI literacy has reached a sufficient level. Kind of what are those next hurdles in terms of people being enabled on what those next steps are going to be?
I think it kind of rolls into something we've seen people deal with challenges when integrating Gen AI solutions, which is not everybody's a fan. Some people are skeptical, opposed, feel threatened by the technology. And so I think there's upskilling, yes, but I think also just getting people comfortable and understanding how it can help them perform their job more efficiently, as opposed to being a threat to their job is a big part of rollouts in production that we've had to deal with. Is doing the upskilling. We'll do training sessions and onboard people to the project, but getting them involved in the process of the build and getting their ideas and input can not only help refine the solution you're building and get them comfortable with it, but it kind of helps to get it into a production state where people are really using it and getting value out of it.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. And in terms of just thinking through general roadblocks, I think we've talked a little bit about what are the next use cases that are starting to come up on the scene. What do you think might be challenges there or problems to solve over the next 6 months, 12 months? Anything you foresee?
I think the next 6 months, I think people are going to be pressed more into what value is this generating. I think there's been a hype cycle we've been going through where everybody's saying Gen AI all the time, and then you get directives. We need to be doing Gen AI, and then everyone starts fiddling around, and then it starts to be, okay, well, what value are we getting out of this? And I think that's going to be the key. And I think solutions like Dataiku are excellent for monitoring how people are engaging with solutions like that. And I think having that meta framework in place is what's going to become more important in the next 6 months. Is, can I actually communicate people are using this? Can I attach some sort of tangible ROI to it? How can I scale that beyond what it is?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We have kind of the hot buzzwords that mean people are tapped in, but it's time to see numbers and ROI. Yeah. Kirsten, Austin, anything to add? Challenges, things to look out for?
I think the transparency is going to be key. And it's so funny, like, again, you think about when cloud became a thing, it allowed people to containerize workloads and tag infrastructure and say, oh, I know how much I'm spending on this project. And I think LLMs are the next frontier for that is, hey, I've got an OpenAI account, great, everyone's using it, but at the end of the day, if I've got to track and say my Gen AI project is providing this much value, I need to know that visibility. And so again, the stuff that Chad was talking about with our guard services, cost services, and things like that, I think is very timely from hearing what our customers are thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a great call.
I definitely agree. So +1+1. I think what I'm looking forward to in the next 6 months as we kind of watch these use cases become more and more complex, again, is the understanding of how are we using the tool, where are people interacting with it, because I also think that's going to start to shift a little bit. And so when I think about the education piece of using these tools and the impact that has downstream, where you put out an external facing product that's based on an LLM, and maybe the results that are coming out of it aren't in check, or the results aren't something that are truthful, right? You've got all of these hallucinations that are likely to happen within these statistical models. And so I'm interested to see how we start controlling for that and how we start talking to the general public or the consumers of these models, whatever that might look like for your particular use case, so that there is an easy way to provide that feedback, but also an understanding that like an LLM isn't going to be 100% true all the time. So how are we providing the ability to check that information really quickly and effectively?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think as with everything, there has to be a gauge about what levels of risk are you comfortable with, what does that look like in terms of cost, what does that look like in terms of getting it wrong, and then choosing your use cases accordingly, right? More risk, more reward. So I want to start to wrap us up, and we've talked a little bit about what the tangible things coming down the pipeline look like, the things that you can already kind of start to see out on the horizon. I want to take a moment to think of really moonshot out here and just get hot takes from everybody on stage. So I want you to finish the sentence, my hot take about what's going to happen in the next 6 months is, and then take a couple minutes to expand on that.
Okay.
Go controversial as much as you can.
Controversial. I'll stir some controversy. I think over the next years, we're going to start to see tiers of companies emerging. I think there's going to be companies who are unable to make the cultural shift into integrating solutions like this. And then there's going to be new companies that come along that build this as their core layer and wrap humans around the technology as opposed to wrapping technology around the humans. And I think those are the companies that are really going to start to scale because you can leverage the technology just so much more effectively. And so companies that are able to make that cultural shift and make that adoption and drive engagement are going to be the ones that are kind of emerging leaders over the next few years.
I like that. I see it. Definitely a great selling point. Kirsten, what's your hot take?
In the next year, we are going to have a cure for cancer. That's my hot take. Very hot take. Here's the basis of this. So I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. I spent a couple of years of my undergrad doing research on protein folds, specifically to take a look at developing an HIV drug. Since then, we've got PrEP. PrEP is a great option to prevent HIV. I know that the Nobel Prize this year, if you guys haven't looked into it for chemistry, is within AlphaFold. These are things that we were trying to do in a supercomputing institute with thousands and thousands of people kind of building on this. And part of this idea is also coming from reading an essay from Anthropic's CEO. There is the ability, I'm very much in agreement with this essay, that we can do the work of so many people with just a single LLM or agent, where the research is going to look different, the ability to get through the FDA compliance process is going to be shortened significantly, and I think we're going to start to actually see some serious moves in pharmaceuticals.
That would be incredibly exciting. Here's open. Austin, close us out.
I don't know if I can follow that. So I guess my hot take, spicy prediction, whatever you call it, I think within the next year, we will see a public showing or a public article coming about where someone has backtracked off of a GenAI use case, strictly from cost. I think we will see, just as we see some folks kind of moving away from cloud back to on-prem, I think there will be a migration where, back to Aaron's point from the beginning, there's a lot of GenAI, we got to use GenAI, let's do GenAI, and maybe this isn't the right use case, but we're going to do it because it's hot right now. And I think there's going to be a public coming out where, hey, I waste a lot of money doing this for GenAI, and it'll make waves, and a lot of people will start to question and want to get answers as a result of that. But that's my prediction.
Yeah, no, great call out. All right, I want to open up the floor for any questions. If anyone has anything they'd want one of our speakers to expand on, any one of these hot takes. Do we have any takers? Ooh, I see one over there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Zana Bilal with Rower Consulting. My question is there a specific industry that you all are seeing a bigger need for this type of technology versus maybe another industry where you guys are like, guys, we need to get you on the right track? So I just wonder if there's a delineation there.
So I think, to Austin's previous point, when I think about GenAI use cases, it tends to be qualitative over quantitative, right? I think industries like manufacturing, I know that there are use cases. I think they're going to be a lot harder to build GenAI use cases around when we're thinking about things like predicting logistics for supply chain. That to me feels like a very traditional AI/ML use case. As I mentioned earlier, I think when I think about the pharmaceutical industry, when I think about things like neuroscience, which require a high level of understanding not only the drug creation process, but then also having to follow all of the compliance, the documentation, the resources that go into not only ideating, but then also being able to build out those specific pharmaceuticals, I think there's going to be a huge impact in pharma and healthcare from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think have seen similar. I think industries that are information heavy, like finance, pharma, all those sorts of things, it's immediately obvious use cases. One thing we have seen and that we're working on that's a personal project of mine is in the manufacturing space, because retail, manufacturing, they have a lot of sequence data. There's a lot of IoT data, and at its core, these LLMs are autoregressive sequence models. So they're transformer architecture. So we've been pre-training transformer foundational models for applications in areas like manufacturing for predictive maintenance and forecasting. There have been some research progress there. So I think those will come later because they're less obvious. So yeah, currently it's sort of like a scale tip where it's more legal, healthcare, pharma sort of thing. I think in the future, manufacturing, retail will start to see those as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.